Hey Ashley, let's take a look at your week 6 final project here. You've got just a lot of stuff going on in this environment, and I think you went with a really ambitious overall kind of setup for your room, where you weren't just dealing with a room, but almost in a way multiple rooms with the nook and the living area. And I think in some areas it really works out well. I think the nook does end up being one of the more eye-catching areas within the scene. The reds, the yellows, and I really like the variation in grays for the pillows, and just how nicely it stands out. I also think the bookshelf is just really, really nice. The different colored books and how dense it is. You've got some kind of boxes below, some frames up top. It feels like a real bookshelf, a used bookshelf, and it's got just such a nice amount of color in it and a nice amount of depth. As you can see, the boxes kind of moving in to the depth of the bookshelf. I thought you did a really nice job, and especially kind of in this back area where there's a lot of color, a lot of variety, and the depth, seems to be working well. I think the living area is not as successful. I think a lot of it just comes down to needing a more distinct value range. It's very difficult for the couch, for instance, to tell where the top plane is, where the back of the couch is, or where you would rest your back, where the seat is, and where you would kind of lay your leg against. So there isn't any kind of sense of form. There needs to be, I think, a clear delineation between each of these, areas. I think from here to here, it needs to be a lot darker. From here to here, you need to show the difference between it going in this direction and this direction, and then moving down again. So it's very, very unclear in that respect. And then I think the floor itself also just needs to be dealt with more. I think it has to be smoother, although I know marker's dying, but you have to do something about not letting the marker dictate the texture, which it's doing right now. I think it might work a little bit better as a wood texture if it was going with the flow of the perspective to a certain extent. But right now it kind of moves in this direction, and then it changes direction slightly, and it doesn't kind of conform to the perspective. But I think in general it also needs to have more even coverage, and it has to have a texture in place that you have kind of drawn in, rather than relying on it to solely do all of it. I think it can do some of it, but you have to do things like maybe go in with a very light gray and start to kind of draw in each of the panels as you kind of see them, and that might help to create a little bit more of a wood, kind of hardwood floor, texture. I think the other big thing that's really just kind of permeating this drawing is that the perspective feels very, very inconsistent. If we kind of take a look at things like the bed here, as it's moving back into space, it feels very different than how the couch seats are moving back into space, or how this is moving back into space as well. And I think that it actually needs to be conforming more to the perspective of this wall that's here. So you have this bookshelf, okay, that's kind of going in this direction. You have the wall and the floor going in this direction. Well, that bed needs to be doing the same thing, and that means it's going to be a really, really severe kind of cut that's being made. But I think that what you need to do is it needs to be a lot thinner. I think we're seeing way too much of the top of the bed for the place it is, for the height that it is, and it also feels a little out of proportion to the other objects, where it just feels very, very big. So I feel like this final, it's kind of a victim of circumstances. Your markers are running out, you're trying to make do with what you have, and I just think in some cases it turned out for the better. Like, you actually kind of write this in your written component. The nook ends up being kind of a pleasant little surprise because it's so colorful, but I think a lot of the other areas suffer because you've got inconsistent coverage. You have a harder time making detail. You see a lot of streaking and mark making that I don't necessarily think should be there, and it just becomes kind of a mixed bag for it.